It is Monday, October 10th. This is the Wiltfong Whiparound. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm your host, Lance Glynn, joined alongside by the Director of Recruiting for 24/7 Sports, Steve Wiltfong. Before we start, I just want to remind everyone to like this video and subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast feed, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and a review. It was a busy week 6, a lot of big games, a lot of big visit weekends. And on today's episode, we're going to break down a few for you and discuss the latest on some top recruits. But before we do that, Steve, from the looks of things, you're really becoming one with nature and soaking up some nice relaxation. How are you doing on this fine Monday?
Hey, man, they did not have fall break back in the 80s and 90s when I was a child, but now I'm raising 2 boys and they have fall break. So we're, instead of just staying cooped up in the Wiltfong homestead, we got them out here in little nature, got a cabin for a few days here, gonna enjoy that for a little bit. But also, hey man, recruiting never stops. So here we are on Whip Around on Monday morning with the latest buzz from the trail.
Yeah, and I said on last Monday's episode that you never stop either. And even in a cabin in the woods, you're still going, you're still getting that good information for all our listeners and all our viewers. So let's get right to it, Steve. The Florida Gators scored a big 24-17 win in the Swamp against Missouri to move to 4-2 in Billy Napier's first season at the helm there. They currently sit just outside the top 10 at number 11 in the 24/7 Sports team recruiting rankings. But their play this year and that win, frankly, may have made an impression on some top targets committing soon. So what are you hearing about the Gators, that win, that victory on Saturday, and their recruiting efforts as we near the middle of October?
Well, this coaching staff has been making a big impression on top targets since the moment they arrived in Gainesville. Billy Napier and his coaching staff are some of the most authentic guys in college football. They do it right on the recruiting trail. They build relationships, sound relationships the right way with high school coaches, parents, prospects, and there's a lot of belief in them that they're going to turn Florida back into a national powerhouse. And I think that this is setting up to be an exciting weekend or exciting week for Florida on the trail, with a couple top targets set to announce their college decision on Thursday. These are guys that were trending to Florida for quite some time. The season's just kind of validating the trajectory of the program and prospects that are committed to Florida. They're sitting at number 11, as you said, in the 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings, could be up to number 8 by the end of Thursday. These are guys that believe that they can help Florida take the next step under Coach Napier and this staff. Bryce Thornton, a safety out of Alpharetta Milton, has been a major target for Florida the entire cycle. You know, William Piegler, Patrick Toney, Coach Napier and company have been on him as hard as anybody on the board. You know, Alabama is another program that Bryce has strongly considered. Georgia Legacy, and Lance, we've talked about it, man. Georgia, they have a terrific class, obviously number 2 class in the country. They're in on some outstanding prospects, and we're going to talk about Georgia later. But they've got some legacy recruits out there that could haunt them down the road. And Bryce Thornton is a prospect that could really haunt Georgia, in my opinion, down the road when you're talking about that Florida-Georgia rivalry. And I think that Bryce Thornton's going to end up picking Florida on Thursday. Both his dad played football at Georgia. His mom played basketball at Georgia. He's a potential Gator going into his announcement. And he's a guy that has just from a tangible and intangible standpoint, you know, has everything that you're looking for. A natural leader, a guy that's around the football. 5 picks last year. I believe he's already got two or three this year, but comes from good genetics. He's an instinctual player that can tackle and play around the line of scrimmage and be physical. Certainly he's rangy, but I just think the instincts that he brings to the field and that leadership mentality are things that set him apart as a prospect, and why Coach Napier and company love him and have pushed so hard for him the entire cycle. I think that will bear fruit for them when he announces his college decision on Thursday. Also expected to commit on Thursday is top 247 cornerback Dijon Johnson. He is a former Ohio State recruit or Ohio State commit that's also strongly considered Miami here down the stretch, but like where Florida stands with Dijon as well. And so I think that he's a guy that brings versatility to your secondary, could play corner, could play safety. Corey Raymond has led the charge on Dijon Johnson. I think proximity to home has a lot going for it for Florida in this recruitment. And if Florida can land Bryce Thornton and Dijon, it would push their class up to number 8, and then it would really give them a terrific foundation in the secondary. I mean, this class is already loaded on defense. We've talked about the defensive line, and they want to add to it, but they got a lot of size and explosive play on the defensive line in this class, led by Cameron James and Kelby Collins. But they have a nice foundation already in the secondary with Jordan Castile. Jakeem Jackson's a top 247 player that can fly. Aaron Gates is a player in this class that people don't talk about enough. It's a terrific multi-sport kid that's also really good at baseball, but 6 foot, 180 pounds, a two-way difference maker for Trinity Christian School down there in Georgia that I think could be an immediate impact player for Florida. Michigan's trying hard to flip him from Florida, but those 3 guys already in the fold, land these 2 DBs, and then go get Cormani McLean, the 5-star corner, and that's a hell of a defensive back class. That's a hell of a class in general. Never mind the fact that Florida would still love to land Caden McDonald, the top 247 defensive lineman who returned this weekend. I talked to him last night, and he was just blown away by Florida's new facilities. He already loved the coaching staff, has so many relationships with Coach Napier, Coach Chaos, Sean Spencer, Coach Cheney. The list goes on and on of the people he's already connected with at Florida. Now he's going to commit on Halloween. He put that out there last week. We were one of the outlets that had the story first, and Clemson and Oklahoma's getting an official this weekend. Clemson maybe in 2 weeks for Caden McDonald. Already took officials to Michigan and Ohio State in September. And he took his official to Florida in the summer, Lance. So this was a return trip to the Swamp where he got his first look at those facilities, and it blew him away. And so Florida, they're really pushing for him. They'd love to flip John Walker from UCF. They've had him on campus for a couple games this year. That is not a foregone conclusion that he'll flip, but obviously he has high interest in Florida. James Smith and Quay Walker, the composite 5-stars from Alabama. Those are 2 that they're pushing extremely hard for. And Rico Walker's another that they would like to add. But this Florida class, there's a lot of names still on the board, Lance. They're going to fight to the end to try and flip 5-star 24/7 Sports composite 5-star running back Cedric Baxter from Texas. The 3 offensive linemen they'll try and flip: Roderick Carney, Lucas Simmons, Tommy Kinsler. Those are guys that they're still all in on. So Florida working hard here to finish with a top 10 recruiting class, and could be in the top 10 here by Thursday, Lance.
Yeah, and Florida, obviously, they're recruiting in the last couple of years. 2021, they were outside the top 10, obviously, last year, and what was a transition year outside the top 10. So if
they had some big wins there at the end, though, Lance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at a transition class, obviously, that's the excuse for not being in the top 10. But like you said, had some definitely big wins as signing day neared. And if they can get into the top 10 and Billy Napier's really first class, that would signal a big change in recruiting for Florida, and I think would be big for them moving forward. And you mentioned they have so many targets still left on the board besides the ones committing on Thursday. So this class, could potentially move to number 8, could potentially go even higher, which I think is great news for the Gators and for their chances to kind of rise back up in the SEC East and hopefully for them get to a level that Georgia is at. And speaking of Georgia, look,
hey, before we pivot to Georgia, I want to say one thing, with Florida and this new staff, Lance, the under the previous staff, which Coach Mullen I thought was a good football coach, they struggled to win head-to-head recruiting battles with the premier programs in the SEC. And so with that, it's hard to consistently beat them on Saturdays. You can maybe win 1 out of 5 or whatever, but if you're not winning those recruiting battles against the SEC contenders, you're going to have a hard time winning on the field. And to beat Georgia for Kamari Wilson, to beat Alabama and Georgia for Shamar James, to flip Devin Moore from Notre Dame, those were recruiting battles at the end that we weren't used to seeing Florida a win. And then certainly in 2023, they have a lot of recruiting wins like that, but it just, those tone setting recruiting wins at the end of the cycle last year to beat powerhouse programs, to beat schools that have been in the college football playoff the last few years, I thought really showed us the recruiting chops that Billy Napier and company have in Gainesville.
Yeah, and I like how you said that those tone-setting wins, carrying momentum from 2022 into 2023, and now Florida is pushing for a top 10 class, and who knows, maybe even higher than that. So moving on to Georgia now, they had a blowout win over Auburn this past weekend, and like Alabama, they had a bunch of blue chippers on campus to see the game. What kind of impression were the Bulldogs and head coach Kirby Smart able to make on those top targets in attendance this past weekend?
Well, another dominant win against a rival opponent in between the hedges. I think it was great vibes in Athens as Georgia played pretty well for the first time in a couple weeks, and so I think jovial locker room afterwards, the recruits on campus getting a chance to be around the players on the team was kind of the big takeaway of the weekend, and going out to dinner with a big group, going out to dinner with the staff afterwards, and being in that kind of setting. I think those things move the needle in recruitments here, which have become, it's a game of inches here down the stretch with some of these elite guys as they near their college decision. Lance Samuel Mpemba was back in Athens. Wouldn't be surprised if he's back again soon. I love Georgia's position for the composite 5-star edge rusher, a St. Louis native out of IMG Academy. I think that Georgia is the clear team to beat for him, and sounds like he had another terrific visit when you talk about people that spent time with him. Jordan Hall, top 247 defensive lineman, is another prospect that Georgia's been trending for a while, that I finally logged my 24/7 Sports crystal ball there for. Now, certainly Florida. I don't know if I mentioned him in the Florida segment, but Florida's pushing hard. Florida State's pushing hard. Ohio State's scheduled to get an official visit. So there's some other contenders for Jordan Hall, but really like Jordan's positioning or Georgia's positioning for him. They had an official visit from 5-star edge Damon Wilson, talking to a source that spent some time with him over the weekend. Georgia, it looks, I loved Ohio State's position in September. I think that Georgia's making it very interesting down the stretch here. Alabama's another school you can never count out. Miami's the fourth one in play here, but I think Ohio State, Georgia have Ohio State's had a lot of momentum for a while. Georgia, with the summer visit and this official visit, have certainly put themselves in the thick of it. Coach Chid is leading the charge for Georgia on that one. And look, this is a Georgia class. It's ranked number 2 nationally, and it's a program known for the way they play defense. They just had a legendary defense last year, one of the best in college football history. And the NFL draft can attest to that. And when you look at the class that they have right now, it's already the best linebacker haul in America. They got some really nice pieces in the fold in the secondary right now. When you talk about Jonel Aguero, who was back on campus this weekend, and AJ Harris is a 5-star corner, 24/7 Sports composite 5-star corner, who's the jewel of the class. So they got some nice pieces there. Maybe they add Chris Peel to that moving forward alongside Daniel Harris and company in that class. So the front is the focus for Georgia here, Lance, as they try and finish this thing out strong. But as they get some guys and get some guys alongside Jamal Jarrett, who was one of their most coveted defensive tackles in the country. He was back on campus this weekend, and Gabe Harris. They want, like I said, I love where they stand with Mpemba. I like where they stand with Jordan Hall and have him predicted to Georgia. And then Damon Wilson, if they can go out and add him, they're still pushing for a guy like Quay Russaw as well. I think that obviously would solidify what they're trying to do on the trail in this class to keep playing the style of play that they want to play for years to come.
And yeah, and you just, you keep mentioning, blue chip edge after blue chip edge, and a guy like Damon Wilson and a guy like Samuel Mpemba. And I know we talked about it last Monday, but if you're a defensive lineman and Georgia comes calling, it's really tough to not say no, to not say yes, excuse me. Because what they do with putting defensive linemen in the NFL, and not only that, but playing defensive linemen early. I mean, it would be tough for an edge rusher to get a call from Kirby Smart and to get a call from the Georgia staff and say no. So you got to like Georgia for some of the talent that saw their game this past weekend against Auburn.
We put in a 24/7 Sports crystal ball for Georgia to land 2024 receiver Sakobe White, also, who's kind of a slot that easily creates separations, strong hands. We loved him at the All-America Combine in January. He camped at Georgia, earned it on the field, has been back to campus several times, and think he could end up in Georgia's class soon in 2024. Sakobe White, a slot receiver that can be very dangerous in space.
Yeah, and again, a Georgia class that's already ranked number 2 in 24/7 Sports team recruiting rankings for 2023, and then you mentioned a 2024 as well.
They're going to bring in another running back. Georgia would like another running back in this class. They had Roderick Robinson on an official visit this weekend from California. He's having a terrific senior year. Georgia's certainly in the thick of that one, but they also could. They're also in the mix to potentially flip down the road Jordan Louis, who's committed to West Virginia right now, having a terrific senior season for Meadow Creek High there in the Peach State. He was on campus this weekend. He's coming back next weekend. He said Kirby Smart loves him, loves his film. They got him coming back next weekend. So Coach Del McGee, Coach Smart, and that offensive staff on top of Jordan Louis, depending on, we'll see what happens with a guy like Roderick Robinson moving forward, who was the last visitor to leave. That was just based on his scheduled logistics, but he was the last prospect of what was a star-studded weekend in Georgia still on campus.
Man, I'm jealous. Let me tell you, hearing big prospect after big prospect, I wish my alma mater was able to recruit that way. So now let's finish off with Alabama, a game everyone was looking forward to ever since the Jimbo Fisher-Nick Saban dispute this past summer. A huge upset last year when A&M beat Alabama in College Station. And the game this year in Tuscaloosa, it certainly lived up to the hype surrounding it, right? The Tide came out victorious 24-20, stopping the Aggies with goal to go, on the final play of the game to stay undefeated going into a big game next week in Knoxville against Tennessee. A ton of blue chippers took in the game, multiple 5-stars on campus. Steve, what can you tell us about the atmosphere those recruits experienced in Tuscaloosa and their thoughts coming out of the visit to Alabama?
Well, I think unreal was a word that was used a lot, and then talking to Caleb Downs about it, him talking about that atmosphere at crunch time, saying that the stadium just came alive, there at the end, really helped Alabama. Really helped Alabama there at the end. And then Coach Saban said that on CBS, just talked about how the home crowd helped the team on the field get a win there in his post-game interview there. The recruits felt that. They felt that energy in the stands. And Alabama is the number 1 class in the country right now for 24/7 Sports, but they're not anywhere close to being done. They're in the thick of it for many of the nation's best. The number 1 edge rusher, Keon Keeley, was back on the number 1 edge rusher, Keon Keeley, was back on campus. And we talked about him really vibing with the Ohio State recruits with 2 September visits to Columbus. He's certainly built some strong bonds and reports with guys that are committed to Alabama. So getting back around potential teammates, getting around Will Anderson in the team was big to continue to see how he fits in with the guys in the Alabama locker room. And then the Alabama parents are just doing a good job of building a relationship with Keon Keeley's family. And so I think they really feel at home at Alabama. And then certainly the track record of the program and the player development, all that speaks for itself already. And so, talking to people that have spent time with Keon, the returns are strong. And certainly you see that on social media as well. Suntarine Perkins is a top 100 player out of Raleigh, Mississippi. That has been committed to Ole Miss for a while, but there's been a ton of smoke around Alabama for almost just as long. And even if you look at Bama Online, insider Hank South's quick interview with Suntarine after the game, he's using the word "we" when talking about Alabama. So certainly would not be a surprise if Perkins ultimately ended up in Alabama's class, an outstanding 2-way player on the prep level who has all the traits to just be a special player on defense on the next level. Arian Carter's a linebacker who's really blown up as a senior from Smyrna, Tennessee. This was his second visit to Alabama for a game this fall. He's coming back for an official in November. Now he's locked in official visits to Michigan, Ohio State, LSU, and Tennessee as well. He's also attended a game at Tennessee this year, and he's committed to Memphis, but we don't expect him to sign with the Tigers. Alabama, 2 game visits already, an official visit for the Iron Bowl down the road. You got to figure that they're in great shape. Same goes with 4-star receiver Jaron Hamilton from Gainesville. He's going to take an official to Michigan, has a return trip for Alabama locked in for the Iron Bowl as well. And so he's certainly high on Alabama. And when you talk to Dylan Lonergan and Downs, they feel good about closing a lot of these recruitments. Time will tell. These guys are making their own decisions. But Alabama certainly made an impression on some key remaining targets this weekend. And we'll have more intel as the week continues here. But the early returns from Saturday night through Sunday, as we talk here Monday morning, Lance, is that Alabama really moved the needle with some key 23s on target, and the 24s and 25s I talked to are also raving about it. From Ellis Robinson, who's been the 4 games there, King Joseph Edwards, Kamarian Franklin, and company. That it was a very exciting weekend at Alabama.
Yeah, and you got to credit the Tide. I mean, we just talked about how Georgia had blue chip after blue chip after blue chip. Well, here comes Alabama also having blue chip after blue chip after blue chip. So these 2 programs that obviously very often finish 1-2, or at least in the top 3 of the recruiting rankings. They compete against each other basically every year, whether it's in the SEC championship game or in the national title game. I mean, they're just going head to head and going blow for blow on having these blue chip recruits, and there's really no separation between the two. I mean, the 2 best recruiting schools in the country, in my opinion, and I mean Kirby Smart and Nick Saban both just showing their power this past weekend with having so much star power in the stands, watching both wins. It was really impressive from both.
Well, bringing the show full circle, Florida's trying to get there. That's who we talked about at the top, Lance, and I think that they're specifically recruiting the defense to play at a level where they can be a smash mouth defense that's very that's deep, and they can rotate players and be fresh for 4 quarters. And you kind of look at A&M, man, they're a team that is building, and that defense is getting there. But for them, they're going to have to become more explosive on offense. I think that they have some guys. I think they have some personnel that can do that. Certainly it'll come down to, can they schematically get there? And with Florida, kind of the same thing. Can they juice that offense up and get it going? Because I think they've recruited the receiver position at a very exciting level in this class. They got some guys that can be really dynamic. They have 1 running back in the fold, but can they go out and get Baxter and flip him from Texas? But I love the trajectory of Florida's program right now, and think that this Florida-Georgia rivalry can be exciting. Tennessee's obviously undefeated, and they have a top 10 recruiting class right now, and they've recruited a lot of guys in the defensive front that have a ton of upside as pass rushers down the road, and so those are a couple other programs that can be knocking on the door and making things exciting. LSU as well, the top 10 class for them too, Lance. And so the SEC, I don't know if it's been the premier conference in college football for a long time, but when you put Billy Napier in there and you put Brian Kelly in the league now, and you see what Lane Kiffin's doing at Ole Miss, and then you got Josh Heupel, who doing a better job than I imagined, to be honest. The SEC is really exciting, and it's going to be a big one in Neyland Stadium this weekend, huh?
Yeah, it'll be a big one. Big is, I think, an understatement, Steve. I think it's going to be a huge one. I mean, we're talking 2 undefeated teams, 2 top 10 teams. Number 1 Alabama. It'll be a show in Neyland for sure. It'll be as the kids say, a movie. It'll be a movie in Neyland for sure this weekend, and we'll definitely hit on it. To tease people for later this week. We'll definitely hit on what I'm sure will be a big recruiting weekend up in Knoxville this coming weekend. But Steve, before we go, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for joining me, man. It's early Monday morning. We made this work, and
I don't want to hold you any longer. You have so much
I'm gonna go
nature.
get on this waffle maker they got in there here, and get that going. Get a cup of mud going as well. And it's crisp out here, but it's gorgeous. And look, maybe if your team isn't losing Friday night games to Nebraska,
oh my God,
we'll be able to talk about blue chippers.
You're gonna get me angry, Steve. You're gonna get me angry. I don't want to talk about it. Trust me, I got all my frustrations, and I was able to vent on Saturday. I was luckily able to watch have a nice relaxing Saturday because I didn't have to watch whatever that joke of a game was on Friday night. But you're gonna get me angry, Steve. I don't want to start my morning off like this, but nevertheless, I wish I was like you and enjoying this nature on a beautiful Monday morning. But I appreciate you giving me some time today. And for those of you watching, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. And if you're listening as a podcast, remember to give the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast feed a 5-star rating and a review. So for Steve Wiltfong, I am Lance Glynn. This has been the Wiltfong Whiparound. Thanks for listening.